Good afternoon, Easton, and welcome to the Rabbi's Roundtable. I'm Rabbi Peter Hyman, Rabbi at Temple B'nai Israel. And if you noticed that we didn't have a Rabbi's Roundtable in July, that's because I was on vacation. Yay. But we're back, and I'm very excited about today's program for a multiplicity of reasons. Let me just share this by way of introduction. At Temple B'nai Israel, we have a program coming up very soon, actually, on Sunday, August 23rd from 2 to 4 p.m. And we are going to be hosting on Zoom a program with Dr. Ori Z. Soltis, who is a professor at Georgetown University. And I'm going to speak more about that. I'm very excited because the topic for the program is Our Sacred Signs, How Christian, Jewish, and Muslim Art Draw from the Same Sources. And this not only speaks to me on an academic level, but also on a personal level. Many of you know that I do Hebrew calligraphy, and I've been dealing with symbols and images and the whole notion of art in religion for a long time. And we are so happy and excited that Dr. Soltis will be joining us. Let me just give a brief introduction, and then we will begin with our guest. Dr. Ori Z. Soltis teaches at Georgetown University across a range of disciplines. He is former director of the B'nai B'rith Klutznik National Jewish Museum and the curator of some 85 exhibits on art, ethnographic, and historical subjects, nationally and internationally. Dr. Soltis has authored or edited 24 books, which is amazing in its own right, and scores of articles and exhibition catalog essays. Recent volumes include Our Sacred Signs, How Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Art Draw from the Same Source, The Ashen Rainbow, Essays on the Arts and the Holocaust, Mysticism in Judaism, Christianity and Islam, Searching for Oneness, Tradition and Transformation, among others. Dr. Soltis, we are delighted to welcome you to the Rabbi's Roundtable, even virtually, because we have a lot to discuss. So thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you virtually, right in front of your Aron HaKodesh.
That's right.
Where it only says no before you, and then it stops because the image doesn't continue.
Yeah, well.
So I don't have to worry about whom you stand.
There you go. See,
a
little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I'm really, as I said, I'm very excited to discuss this and to get your thoughts on a number of things. First, if you want to tell us a little more about your background, go ahead, and then we'll start into the discussion.
Well, to be brief, I've been a lifelong academic. I paused for about 7 years to direct that museum, but I was still teaching adjunct at that time. But I was trained in philosophy and classics, and then I spread my wings through a long story, too long for now, into religious studies in general, Jewish studies in particular. And so I teach, as I said, at Georgetown, across, I do art history, theology, philosophy, politics, all sorts of stuff.
And what's so interesting is, given certainly from a not only a Jewish perspective, but also to some degree a Muslim perspective, the whole notion of how art, which is different in its approach than Christianity, certainly, but how this is really a significant topic that I still think has merit and is for today as well. So
yes.
Let me start by asking the first question, in that when we use the term symbol or symbols, what do we mean from your perspective?
Yeah. A symbol is something, first of all, that stands for something else. And second of all, often it's something that tries to make concrete something else that's abstract. The word itself is a Greek word, symbalon, and it comes from the Greek verb symbalein, which literally means to throw together or to throw with. So you're throwing together the abstract idea with the concrete symbol, or the symbol that stands for something else. You see it used in the Iliad when two individuals want to indicate that they have a peaceable relationship, they exchange gifts. So the gifts are called symbala in the plural because they're the concrete statement of this abstract idea of here we are doing something peaceable in the middle of a war. So then that translates into a whole range of different disciplines, be they verbal, musical, visual, what have you. But certainly in the visual arts, some image represents something other than itself. So it's a symbol.
And just in terms of the current news with the whole question of statues and
absolutely, you could not be more right. And there you have figurative, right? There's nothing abstract here. This is a statue of Robert E. Lee, and it's not only Robert E. Lee, but it's what Robert E. Lee stands for. And of
absolutely, yeah. Statue, they're evocative. They speak in spite of the fact they stand more or less silently. They still communicate. They're very interesting. So as somebody that dabbles in calligraphy, and like I said, I'm not good, but I enjoy it. I always wrestle with the symbols that I use and their meaning. And why do we use symbols in art? I mean, I think it's a legitimate question to address.
Yeah, I think there are at least two reasons. The broad general one, of course, is, I think it's a bit more interesting if I use something indirectly than just indicated directly. But in terms of the history of art's purpose, which has so often been to serve the needs of religion, and religion is dealing with a realm that, after all, is not, particularly for Judaism or Islam, concrete in any way, shape, or form. So if I want to indicate something about God or God's relationship with us, I can't do it directly. So I have to use indirection. And if I use visual terms, which Jews have always done, contrary to still sometime popular belief, they've always done it, I'm going to have to do it indirectly, not directly. Whether it is an image on a 6th century mosaic floor in a synagogue of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, where we have coming out of a sunburst just a pair of hands. So we understand that that's kind of literalizing the notion of the hand of God, but at the same time, it's trying to concretize in a detail the notion of God's presence there, which cannot in a full-fledged manner be conveyed the way, if it were Christian, I could do so by having a full-fledged figurative kind of individual. Or I might go further than that. So I want to symbolize, the 5 books of the Torah. And so in some composition that I've got, I'm using a 5-pointed star or a pentagon, which in its 5-ness suggests that. Or in Jewish art, the 7-branched candelabrum, which not only represents the temple, a detail for the whole, synecdoche, because it was the major artifact, but in its 7-ness connects to the idea of the commandment to keep the 7th day apart, given in Exodus, given Deuteronomy, connecting us to God in a very specific set of ways. So its 7-ness, in a visual, concrete kind of way, connotes the whole journey from slavery to freedom, the whole notion of covenant with its uplifting elements and its responsibilities. So all of that is conveyed by this little 7-branch nothing.
Interesting. And what also for me is has always been a source of not tension or conflict, but the fact that we are told you shall make no graven images of anything that is in the heaven above, the earth below, both in Exodus and Deuteronomy, part of the 10 Commandments. And how do you not put that aside, but how do you embrace that and still be able to do art?
So the nice thing, of course, about religion in general, which is also one of its challenges and difficulties, is that all of these traditions begin with what they take to be God's word, revelation, incontrovertibly. But every tradition, bar none, at a certain point has to leave off and move into the realm of interpretation. Once Moses is gone, I can't say, hey, Mo, what did God mean when God said not to see the kid in its mother's milk in Exodus 23:19? I mean, why does that mean I can't have a cheeseburger?
Well,
so the same can be said of that commandment. What is the context in which you shouldn't make graven images? Yeah. It's the context of everybody around the Israelites do that to make images of their gods to worship them. You're not supposed to do that. So that doesn't prevent me from doing art. It prevents me from doing art that represents or attempts to represent God. Okay. That's the implication. Yes. And that's why there can be and historically has been art by Jews, by Muslims, and not only by Christians and, of course, pagans.
Well, interestingly enough, I've always wondered if you have kosher cheese and kosher meat, why isn't the cheeseburger kosher? But that's a subject for a different discussion.
Yes, indeed.
I digress. So when you're dealing with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, what are the differences in their symbolic language, in the images and the shapes and whatever?
Sure. And again, here I would see two general responses to that. One, of course, is that for Christianity, God assumes human form for purposes of salvation, and therefore God and everything having to do with God can be comfortably depicted figuratively. So I not only see Jesus all the time, but I can see God the Father represented as a figure. That's not uncomfortable. Whereas for Jews and Muslims, obviously that's an impossibility because Judaism and Islam view God as non-physical in any way, shape, or form. The second thing I would say, and therefore Judaism and Islam are reliant typically on a more abstract vocabulary of number symbolism, of color symbolism, of geometric forms, all that stuff, which Christianity can also use, mind you, and does, but it can do figurative. But the other primary issue would be, for Judaism and Christianity, the Hebrew Bible is obviously an important source. For Christianity, but not for Judaism, the New Testament is, so the subject matter is going to be drawn from that. And for Islam, to a certain extent, those texts might work, but fundamentally it's going to be the Quran and what's called the Hadith, which will be the primary source material. So it's both the kind of art that they respectively do and the source material upon which they base their art.
Do you think artists always recognize this as background? Some do, I'm sure, but it's an interesting question. I mean, I know when I sit down to do a ketubah or a wedding contract or a piece of calligraphy, I think about the images and their meaning, but that's because I like that stuff anyway. I mean, that speaks to me. But
well, you certainly do that, and you can, in part, do that because you've got the knowledge as a rabbi of a lot of this stuff that a lot of other artists might not. So, on the one hand, there are plenty of artists who have and who do think about the meanings of all the symbols they put in their art, and sometimes it can be to such an extent that it becomes overly self-conscious. On the other hand, you have a vocabulary of symbols, who knows when exactly it began, that is passed down from generation to generation. So here I'm doing a ketubah and I use a six-pointed star, and I didn't even realize that didn't start as a Jewish symbol. It started way before Judaism as a pagan symbol. It's the meeting of heaven and earth. It's the meeting of the male and the female, etc., etc. I don't even realize that. I'm just thinking it's a Jewish symbol. Or I'm doing a seven-branch menorah, and I have no awareness of the layers of symbolism underneath it. So I think there are many artists who use symbols who are not conscious of the actual underpinning meanings or where they come from and so on.
Yeah, see, for me, that deepens my appreciation, not only of what I'm doing, but what I see in historically classical calligraphy and illumination and all that, including colors. Most people don't recognize that there are meanings behind blue or green or red.
Exactly. Look, if I go and I look at Gauguin's painting in 1888 it's called Vision After the Sermon. Sure. And it's these Breton women, who've obviously just come out from church, and they're so intense that they're actually seeing Jacob wrestling the angel on the lawn before them, but the lawn is all bright red. So I think, wow, aesthetically that really appeals to me. This whole image is so cool, but it might not occur to me that the red, and it may not have occurred to Gauguin, that the red has this connotation of passion, and originally it meant suffering, and here it probably just means the passion of emotion, etc., or all kinds of things of that sort. So you can live without knowing the meanings, but I agree with you. It kind of enriches, for me, knowing what's going on.
It deepens it. And I go, oh yeah, look at that, how cool. The interlocking squares, like the Star of David, the realm of heaven and the realm of earth. And do you think symbols change over time?
I think they do. I mean, some, I guess, are simply consistent, but they can change their meanings, I think, in two different ways. I just gave an example of the color red, where in traditional Christian art, it referred to passion in the sense of the suffering of Jesus,
right?
Blood.
Yeah.
And eventually, in the modern era, it may still be used, as I think Gauguin was using it in the painting I just mentioned, to mean passion, but it really referred to the faith of those Breton women, which is so passionate, rather than the suffering of anybody. Right. So in that sense, there can be changes, but also obviously, let's say a five-pointed star or a pentagon. That won't necessarily change in the vertical sense, but in the horizontal sense. So if I'm seeing it in Jewish art, I'm thinking, all right, the 5 books of the Torah. If I'm seeing it in a Christian work of art, I'm thinking, aha, the 5 wounds into Christ's body. If I'm seeing it in a Muslim work of art, I'm thinking, oh, the 5 pillars of Islam. So you can have the same symbol that will mean different things at the same time within different artworks because they're parts of different traditions.
I think that's fascinating, and I think it's really, we could spend hours on this one question alone, but if symbols in art traditionally have a religious context, do they ultimately disappear in the secular world, or is it just a transformation?
It is interesting. They don't. I mean, aside from the fact, of course, there are going to be artists even in the secular world who are, in the narrow sense, religious artists, so they're still using the same vocabulary. But someone like Gauguin, he's fascinating. He's a complete, absolute atheist, but he's obviously taken with the faith of different groups. It's not just the Breton women, and I gave one example, the yellow crucifixion, another example, but the faith of the Polynesian people among whom he spent time.
Oh, sure.
Or in a more subtle way, it seems to me, you've got, let's say, Monet, and he does this whole series of images of the Rouen Cathedral. Well, it's not per se religious art. It's about the change in light and conditions across the same surface at a different time of day, at a different season. And of course, because it's impressionist, it also takes into account the fact that the same viewer at different times of day, my eyes may be working differently, so I have to stand at different distances to really see it. So all of that has to do with science. It has to do with spectroscopy. It has to do with optics. But if you think about what underlies it, the cathedral, rather than being the religious symbol, has become the symbol of the human hand because we built that structure, and God, do we think it's solid? But actually, it's not solid. If I've got 20 different versions of it, or actually, I want to say 34, I think he did, then each one is different because the light keeps shifting. Where's the light come from? That's not us. That comes from, all right, I'm an atheist, so I call it nature. But if I'm just a little bit religious, I might say God. Mm-hmm. So the light that changes how I see that same structure, which means it's not as solid as I thought in visual terms, is really a function of God operating. And so God's still there. And mind you, we've opened it up. So I can be an atheist if I want and say, well, it's not God, it's nature. That's fine. Then we're down to terminology again.
Fascinating. Last question.
Sure.
What role do calligraphy and micrography play in this entire discussion?
And this is the calligrapher, mind you, asking the question, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, absolutely.
In case you wondered. I think calligraphy and micrography, particularly in Judaism and Islam, play the role that does two things. It turns letters and words into artworks by transforming them out of their simple, straightforward, normative face. But it also plays wonderfully with the whole idea of a people of the book, a people of texts. People of text can also be people of images. And in this case, the image and the text are one and the same. So whether it is the distortionist, these magnificent distortionist handlings of the Arabic writing system in Islam, which is a cursive system, so I think lends itself to distortionism, so that you end up with 6 major different forms of calligraphy and about 12.5 subsets, or in Judaism with block letters that don't lend themselves as easily to that kind of distortionism, but in micrography takes tiny letters and writes an entire text, the Moses at Sinai, and you've got the image of Moses with the tablets, and it's made up entirely of the text from Exodus. And of course, the challenge for the viewer is to try and figure out where the text began. So it almost forces the viewer to also be a little bit of a scholar and a little bit of a reader and not only a viewer. So the calligraphy and micrography parts in particular of Jewish and Muslim art, I think are fascinating elements.
I do too, actually. And as you know, there are all kinds of what we call midrashim, but stories behind each of the letters, both not only in Hebrew and Jewish tradition, but also in Arabic tradition.
Yes.
And for me, my goal at some point is to learn Arabic. And I want to do, as much as I love Hebrew calligraphy, I just think Arabic calligraphy is
magnificent.
Yeah, exactly. And when you come and visit after the pandemic and you're in my office, I have, several folk have seen this, hanging in my office, I have a prayer rug that is the 99 names of God and a big centerpiece with 2 passages from the Holy Quran. It is just, it is just spectacular.
Magnificent.
Anyway, well, this has been wonderful. I am just so delighted to meet you. I'm looking forward to your being with us virtually, as I said, on August 23rd from 2 to 4 p.m. This program is open to Temple members, friends, and friends in the community. Get to hear you talk and lecture more. We will
at that time I'll be using images, in fact.
Oh, good.
So
good.
Fortunately, you won't be stuck staring at my face.
No, it's fine. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom on a subject I think is really important. You will come back to the Rabbi's Roundtable for sure.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Take care of yourself. Be safe. Thanks.
Bye.
And we will be back to the Rabbi's Roundtable.
Did you know? MCTV programming is available online. Find our shows like Rabbi's Roundtable, Carlisle's Chesapeake, The Shameless Picture Show, Conversations with Sherry, and the Avalon Theater Presents at youtube.com/Midshore Community Television.
And we are back, and welcome to the Rabbi's Roundtable. I'm Rabbi Peter Hyman. Normally we come to you from the studios of MCTV. We haven't been doing that for a while. Actually, you are now looking at what is part of the sanctuary at Temple B'nai Israel, where I am the rabbi. And joining me for this segment of the show is my friend and colleague, Bishop Joel Johnson, and who is not a stranger to the Rabbi's Roundtable. Welcome, even virtually, to the Rabbi's Roundtable, Joel.
Great to be with you, Peter.
Yep. And I thought what we'd do for a moment, we'd talk about, we did this the last time on the last show, but let's just talk a little bit about the atmosphere, the conditions, what you're seeing, and give people a message of hope and the continued strength.
I'm finding that it's a very difficult time for a lot of people. Even though I'm retired, people are still calling me, and of course I'm happy that they do call me, and I'm even happier if I'm in a position to be able to help them spiritually, psychologically, with any of the things that are ailing them. And there are a lot of things that are ailing them. Needless to say, the practical aspects, finances, what are they going to do with their kids? If school doesn't start, in fact, if school does start, what are they going to do for their own jobs? Right. There are these practical kinds of issues. But, even greater than that, what I'm finding is that people are having issues regarding their own identity, issues regarding what is my purpose in life. And, for some people, this has become a time of learning how to sing and dance like Anne Marie. They're not really having success in coping with the larger issues, the spiritual, the psychological. What are you finding in this way?
Well, I find it's, you're right. It's a tough time for everybody. I really feel sorry for the children, for the students.
Yeah.
Whether they're college or high school, kids missed their graduations, kids missed those ceremonies where they get to go in, from elementary school to junior high or whatever. And it's a challenging time, although it's really interesting. I have found people being somewhat more sensitive and I think a bit kinder to one another these days, generally.
Yeah, I think that's very true. People are being more considerate. I think of the mask is one of the reasons why. They're looking at people and not really knowing for sure if they know them, and so they're having to treat them as if they do know them.
That's correct. That's correct. I get a kick out of going into the bank with a mask on. I never thought I'd do that. And I said to one of the bank that I do business, I said to one of the guards, I'd say stick them up, but I said it's redundant. Everybody's got a mask on.
Well, I find it interesting when I go grocery shopping. As you know, I'm not exactly a foodie, but I do love going into grocery stores. And it's very interesting, the reaction that I get from people when they're aware that I'm in the aisle behind them and I'm 6 feet behind them, and they feel a little bit rushed, and I have to tell them it's okay, I have the time. And I find that is, really that I'm making some new friendships. People asking, do I know you? And I always answer, well, you kind of do now, and it gets us talking to each other. You're right. Yeah. You're right. I think people are being kinder to each other.
And not that we always should be, but there's a necessity now for that even more than just under normal circumstances, I think, and that's important. That's important. I guess. The only thing I can say is we just have to stay strong and try to be as healthy as we can and as positive as we can, and support everybody as we work through this.
Oh, yeah. I think that is so true, and I think that wishing people well, actually using such words as "I wish you well," or well, you know how it is in our line of work. We always wish people peace, whether we say shalom or peace be with you. People are really responding to that even more than they ever have, I've found.
Well, and I know that the clergy community in our area is available for folk if they need us anytime. And that's also important for us because we then can share with them our feelings and as they share with us and provide a sense of strength and comfort and direction, hopefully.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Anything else you want to add to this, Joel?
Yeah, I would like to say that what I have found personally for me, as you know, I read a lot, but I have found that during this time I've been doing a lot more directed reading, in the sense that I've been not merely reading one book just for the thrill of it, but I've been reading collections of books that have something to do with each other, and trying to learn something new in my own personal experience, my own personal jog around this planet during my life. So I'm finding more directed reading. I'm also finding a greater comfort, a greater solace in my music studies. As you recall, I'm an old NPR classical music broadcaster from way back. And of course, music is really my life, so that I'm always into new works, new composers. So I'm finding that that's a good activity too. And having said this about myself and my own interests, I've just got to guess that so many of our listeners are prepared for this kind of experience too, using this locked in time to develop ideas, develop themes in our lives that we've always been interested in. Reading about bees. I ran into a lady in the store the other day whom I haven't seen for a while, and she said that she's been studying bees during this time.
Interesting.
It's very interesting. People are getting into new stuff.
Well, it's a challenging time. It's a time that tests not only our strength, but our faith in some respects, and institutions. And as they say, this too shall pass. Hopefully sooner than later, but it will pass.
Indeed it shall. Indeed it shall.
And, thank you for joining us on the Rabbi's Roundtable.
Always wonderful to be with you. Peace be with you, my brother.
Likewise. And Nick, thank you for your technical support behind the scenes. We will see you next time, Easton, on the Rabbi's Roundtable.